I'm Carole Taylor. On this edition of Journal, we take a close look at the art of pollsters. You know, if you want to know what your neighbours are thinking or what Canada is thinking, ask a pollster. Poillievre is ahead of Trudeau by 20 points. Or now Carney is ahead, maybe. Or 45% of Americans think Trump is doing just a swell job. And then we remember 2016, when the majority of American pollsters said with confidence Hilary would win the election. Then didn't. Whoops. But since that time, much self-examination has been going on in the world of pollsters. Who is your sample? How do you reach people when many don't have a landline anymore? Or don't answer their cell when they don't recognize the number? Or how about those cagey folks who give the wrong answer just to complicate the results? So like it or not, polls play a big role in how we see the issues of our time. What intrigues me is what the pollsters see behind those numbers. After all, they're looking at these questions over and over. What trends are they identifying? What changes are happening? And what does it mean? Mario Canseco is president of a well-respected, often quoted Canadian company, Research Co. He looks beyond the obvious question of which party are you going to vote for. He wants to know why. And who are you? A senior? A young man? Someone in the sandwich generation caught between raising a family and caring for aging parents? And how do you capture in numbers the worries and uneasy feelings of the average Canadian? Well, that's where the analysis comes in. After this break, we're back with Mario to try and understand the winds of change that are rocking our society. Mario Canseco joins us now, and you are the pollster these days. I see you quoted everywhere. But I was thinking that really the ultimate poll is Election Day. And that's when you know exactly what people are intending to do. And I want to ask your opinion, because I was kind of shocked after the NDP provincial election, which was so tight. And election night, we still didn't really know. But I heard the Premier stand up and say, there was a clear majority for progressive values. That wasn't how I saw it. Is that how you saw it?
It's one way of looking at it, a very convenient way, mind you, as far as thinking about the Greens being closer to where the NDP is and maybe adding those numbers and thinking more than 50% of people voted for parties that are not conservative. It's not a good way to go, because ultimately what you want is for people to choose you, not to avoid choosing the other parties. And it was a significantly closer election. I think there was a moment in the campaign, particularly prior to the televised debate, where the Conservatives were rising, and then it sort of stalled. John Rostad did not have a great debate. There wasn't an opportunity to establish an emotional connection with voters, and I think that's the reason why they finished in second place.
But it wasn't that amazing. He took them from nothing to almost winning the election.
Well, it was impressive. I think when you go back to what we saw in 2020, and there's a lot of people who look at it and go, they were at 2%. They didn't run candidates in every single riding. I think there was a moment in the early stages of the rebirth of the BC Conservatives where people were thinking, can they actually pull this off? Can they actually have candidates everywhere? And it's just a matter of a couple of votes here or there, a couple of candidacies here or there. We'd be talking about John Rostad as BC's Premier.
And so you watched as the polls got tighter and tighter, and then, as you say, stalled at the debate, but still ended up pretty close. What was behind it, do you think? Was it all of a sudden people thinking Rostad was great or Conservatives are great, or was it more an anti what the government was doing?
I think it's a combination of both. Part of it was there was a moment when BC United suddenly just fell out of the charts. And a lot of it had to do with Kevin Falcon's style, but ultimately I think people were looking for a vehicle that was different from what the NDP was offering. I don't think we can go back to the John Horgan NDP as the de facto standard for the center-left, because what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic certainly helped them. He galvanized public opinion behind him. He was somebody who was very, very popular at the time. So I don't think you can look at that election and say, oh, look at how much the NDP has dropped. I mean, usually they're around 40, 44%. So it's ultimately a return to what we've always had, either with social credit, with the BC Liberals, certainly not with BC United, but now we have the BC Conservatives as that center-right option that people who aren't happy with the NDP can support.
And so they've had their first big convention after the election. Did anything stick in your mind about that?
I think the one thing that was quite striking about the annual general meeting is they stopped talking about things that don't matter. You know, we heard a lot of talk about plastic straws and transgender athletes in sports, and a lot of that took the air out in the final stages of the campaign. We heard nothing of that over the weekend. So there's an opportunity for them to say, look at us the same way you used to look at social credit, or the same way you used to look at the BC Liberals under Gordon Campbell. We are your alternative. We're not a party that is going to spend a lot of time talking about things that don't matter to you.
And so do you see this notion of populism, like in the States, in Europe, in Canada, rising, or is it anti-woke that's driving the agenda?
I think it's a little bit of both, but more than anything, there's a chance to connect with the public when things aren't going well. And a lot of it has to do with what you can actually bring to the table afterwards. It's not that complicated to appeal to a public and say everything is wrong, everything is broken, elect me and everything will be better. The first 6 months of the new Donald Trump term are going to serve as a key issue for this. You know, what is going to happen with this? Are we going to see people in the United States become very upset because a gallon of gas isn't $3 anymore? Or can you bring down the cost of your groceries? That is going to be very hard to do. But a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump voted on the basis of this. So you can be a populist. Once you win, it's a whole different ballgame.
So how do you think this is going to play out?
Well, it's so tough to tell. I think part of it is the changing nature of what Donald Trump is saying. You know, it essentially changes every 15, 20 minutes. We're all reacting to what he wants to do. I think it's a complicated aspect for Canadians as well, because we went from a situation at the end of December, early January, where people were fed up with Justin Trudeau, were looking at Poillievre as an option. We had a survey where majorities of decided voters in Ontario and in British Columbia were saying they were voting Conservative. But now it's a completely different situation. So it's ultimately going to be who can establish that emotional connection on the issues that matter, bread and butter issues, kitchen table issues, but also who can be seen as a better counterpart to deal with Donald Trump.
So it's a similar question that we were playing with provincially here. Federally, was Poilievre's support just anti-Trudeau?
A lot of it was really anti-Trudeau, and I think you had a lot of people who were very upset with the way things were going. Part of it was related to the COVID-19 pandemic management, but also because there's really not a lot to show for after all of these years of government. And I think Poillievre is able to tap into that, partly because of the way in which he's connecting with younger people. To me, one of the biggest surprises of the past 4 years has been how many young people are voting Conservative, not only provincially, but also federally. And this really speaks about a generation that has grown and that wants to do something about housing, wants to do something about jobs, and isn't getting some of those answers from the Liberals or the NDP. Traditionally, this is a group that used to be more center-left minded, but now they're looking at anybody who has an option for them.
And that would be both male and female?
Yes, but it's a little bit higher with men. I think men are really looking at the Conservatives as the party that can help them get into the housing markets, do things a little bit differently. It's not necessarily a reaction to the wokeness, if you will, but it's more about, I need somebody who's going to help me get through life. And they're establishing that emotional connection with young voters at this particular stage.
That certainly surprised me when Poilievre first was running for leader. And the rallies were all these young people, and I thought, wow, this is a change, because often rallies, we both know, are packed, the political volunteers who've been there for years and years and years, and it was quite a different look.
It was different, and I think it was also different. It was ultimately ironic for somebody who has followed public opinion for a while to see the NDP provincially as the de facto party of the 55 and overs. This is the same group that voted for Gordon Campbell Liberals or Christy Clark Liberals and said never the NDP. And now they're looking at them as an option because they weren't really sure where Rostad was going. So the next election is going to be crucial. Are you going to have that over 55 group suddenly becoming more conservative? And what is going to happen with those young voters that see the Conservatives as an option here in BC?
So with your polls, are you able to capture the ones who will vote? Because one of the things about seniors, they always say, well, they're the ones that come out and vote.
It's one of the biggest challenges that we have. You know, my colleagues in Australia have an easier time because voting is mandatory. So everybody you talk to is a voter. Here it's more about trying to figure out if they show up, have they voted before, what types of things are they doing to follow campaigns, because not every voter turnout is the same. We just saw it in Ontario where fewer than half of eligible voters actually cast a ballot. So that is also part of the complexity here. When you're looking at the way social media reacts to something, are you talking to voters? Are you talking to people who will actually cast a ballot? That is one of the biggest challenges. I don't think we'll have mandatory voting anytime soon. It would certainly make my job easier.
Well, social media is interesting because everyone says that's where you do all of your advertising, that's where you go. But there are a whole lot of folks that aren't participating in social media.
Well, it really becomes an echo chamber, and that is part of the complexity now, because you're surrounding yourself with people who think exactly like you. You don't have any friends who vote for this particular party. You don't have any friends who believe that the premier is doing things correctly. So therefore, everybody else is wrong, and you're the one who knows everything. I get a lot of messages with certain variations of these two ideas, and you know, it's not something that is conducive to a real dialogue between Canadians. And it's really about figuring out what a representative sample is. And you can never get that on social media.
And of course, our narrow cable news, that reinforces it. We'll continue in just a moment. We're back with Mario Canseco from Research Co. You know the numbers backwards and forwards, but I'm always interested in what you're seeing behind the numbers. Trump is something else. I mean, I don't know how else to express it, but from your point of view, how are you looking at this particular presidency?
The feeling of Canadians, even before the election, was already particularly low. You know, people who felt that Canada was doing better with Joe Biden as the U.S. head of state, a lot of animosity towards Donald Trump from an ideological standpoint. After he becomes president and starts talking about Canada becoming the 51st state and the tariffs and everything, it's no longer ideological. We still have a significant proportion of conservative voters who looked at Trump favorably. Now that's gone. It's a situation, yeah, it's significantly lower than it used to be. And part of it is, now it's no longer about the ideology, it's about the actions of the man. And this is what's making Canadians extremely uneasy. You know, there's a sense that nothing is safe, that things could change within 15 or 20 minutes. And that is what is essentially pushing the animosity towards Donald Trump to levels that we didn't see back in 2016.
What kind of numbers?
Practically 80% who say this is going to be bad for us. A significant proportion of Canadians who say because of what is happening in the United States, I don't want to travel there anymore. I don't want to buy products from the United States. We're going to try to figure out how to have a better trade relationship with other countries. There's Japan, there's Korea, there's the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Mexico. Let's do a deal together. We don't need to talk to the Americans anymore.
Well, I think that's the gift that Trump has given Canada, actually. He woke us up. And I've been thrilled to see the amount of patriotism and nationalism that has been springing forward. You've named a few ways that we see it. How long-lasting is that, do you think? Or is this just a passing feeling?
It's so tough to tell. I think we have examples in the past, and I think we can point to let's say, the supposed unity that the Charlottetown referendum was supposed to bring us, and it ultimately was defeated. We go back to the early stages after the 1995 Quebec referendum, where everybody seems to be united, but you still have a province where you came within a couple of, decimal points of seceding. This one is different because we know nothing is going to change about Trump. And I think whoever can galvanize this feeling better from a federal politics standpoint is going to do well. I think it's a complicated aspect, particularly for Pierre Poillievre. People who wanted to vote for him were flying the flags upside down. Now they're draping themselves in them. So it's kind of strange. And it's a little bit easier for the Liberals to try to say, we are the counterpart. We have somebody here who has the experience to deal with Donald Trump that the other party doesn't have.
It's interesting when you think about how people are responding and the worry that we now have that if we're no longer the best friend, I think we can gather that, at least for the next 4 years.
I would say it's Russia right now for the Americans.
Yes. And so you wonder how that's going to affect businesses. Do you do polling on businesses, what they're feeling about this? They're uneasy, obviously.
There's a lot of concern. I think more than anything, what we're seeing is a feeling that you can't be ready for whatever happens next. If 2 weeks from now something is going to happen and you start to prepare yourself for it, and then everything changes because of a tweet, because of a mention, because of something that Trump said during a press conference where he got confused, it's so tough. And I think it's not that as if this is the first time that we have a negative view of an American president. The numbers weren't that fantastic for George W. Bush, but he never spoke about making us an American state. So you do have that ideology component to it. Now it's different because the actions can be decided, it can have a significant impact in the way we live here.
I think it's having a huge impact, positive impact for a number of politicians. I think it's helped Premier Eby because he doesn't have to talk about disorder in the streets and decriminalization. It's all about Trump. It helped Ford, Premier Ford, and he just started talking only about Trump. It helped Trudeau. Like, I bet Trudeau is sitting there, why did I actually resign? Because now all of a sudden I'm carrying the flag and I'm the hero again.
Well, for Doug Ford, it's something that is quite remarkable. You know, I think it's somehow lost in the narrative that he's won 3 straight majorities. Fewer seats than the last time, but a lot of it has to do with becoming the person who can challenge somebody who is on the outside. And even people outside of Ontario are looking at Doug Ford and saying, you know, maybe this should be the federal Conservative leader at some point if his French holds up. That is the essence of this. You find an enemy that allows you to talk about certain things that you want to see happening without necessarily dealing with the things that you have right in front of you. And I don't know how long this is going to last because, you know, certain aspects of our lives are still under the purview of the premiers, and they need to get their hands dirty and figure out a way to deal with some of those things and not just point at the Americans and say everything that is happening because of Trump.
So the ballot question probably is going to be who can stand up to Trump best or handle Trump best. Would you agree?
I think that is going to be half of it. The other half is going to be how can we bounce back from this? You have a significant proportion of Canadians who are worried about housing. This isn't new to British Columbia, but now we have people in Atlantic Canada, in Ontario, in Alberta who are saying this is a problem for me. And you can talk a lot about housing starts and economic management and unemployment. This is what Joe Biden tried to do in the United States, but it doesn't really make an emotional connection with people. If your nephew is still living in your basement, unless you can figure out a way to establish that emotional connection, all of those numbers don't matter. We saw it time and time again with Joe Biden talking about billions of jobs and millions of this. It's not the kind of thing that connects with people. So if Poillievre or Mark Carney are able to connect with that group and say, I'm going to make your life better, then they will win the election.
And we can't say yet.
Well, that's also part of it, right? A lot of these things take time. Housing is a particularly difficult issue because everything is 4 or 5 years down the road. And premiers, prime ministers, they like to cut ribbons. Very hard to do with housing. Easier to do with transportation, as we've seen in the past. But housing is a very complicated one.
They made over 60 announcements last year where they sort of technically cut the ribbon, another announcement on a housing policy. But when, as you say, people can't see the result in their own life, then that doesn't have much effect. So how has polling changed in the years that you've been doing it?
I think part of it has been figuring out a way not to intrude people. And, you know, this is why we move more towards online tools, making sure that your questionnaire is something that can be handled easily and that people want to take and actually participate. The days of the 60-minute interview face-to-face or receiving a phone call you don't want to get and spending 20 minutes on the phone talking about everything under the sun are starting to go. And there's an emphasis on the actual participation of the public in this. But it's still a challenge more than anything when you're trying to figure out who can cast a ballot. It's easy to talk to a representative sample in a city, in a province, in the country. But trying to figure out who's going to cast the ballot, especially we have the example coming up of the Vancouver City by-election. When 17-20% of people cast a vote, very difficult to figure out when you talk to a representative sample.
So what's your methodology?
We do things online. We have a specific number of online panels, which is groups of people who want to be polled, who want to take surveys. We take a specific portion of each of those online panels to come up with a representative sample for the city or the province or the country. And we establish that our questionnaires have to be of a specific length. We don't want to keep you there for half an hour. We want to make things that are engaging, and we want to talk about issues that you care about.
Well, I have to confess that I got another one of those just last week, and it was very simple. And it just said, are you going to vote? And it's Conservative, Liberal, NDP, whatever. And I looked at it and I thought, I'm not going to vote. Like, what do they do with my information? Once I've connected with them online, how vulnerable am I? And so I think that's one of the things that pollsters have to deal with, besides not answering the phone, which I guess a lot of us do. So I wish you luck, and we'll keep an eye on that by-election and see how it turns out, and on your polling for that. Thank you, Mario.
My pleasure, Carole.
We'll be back in a moment. As they say, may you live in interesting times. A short Liberal leadership race results immediately in a new Prime Minister, one who's never been elected to anything, anywhere. An unelected billionaire in the States trumpets the chainsaw as his weapon of choice, while the U.S. president harangues the president of Ukraine in public in the Oval Office while cameras are rolling. Let me know your thoughts on YouTube. Till next time, I'm Carole Taylor.